Welcome to the More Than Fitness podcast.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Minisode number 50. Can't believe I've already done 50 of these. If you guys have been here with me since Minisode number 1 and way before that, thank you. Or if this is your first one ever you're watching, welcome. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Minisode number 50 on the More Than Fitness podcast. Today's topic, I'm not sure what I'm going to title this yet, but it's going to be something about sequencing exercises properly for muscle growth. Hopefully, maybe I came up with a more creative and enticing name than that, but for now, that's basically what we're doing. We're trying to figure out, okay, you got to go work out. Your goal is to gain muscle mass. What should the order of those exercises look like? Which brings me to the first point that I want to make about this subject, and that is, what is your goal? Because obviously, whatever your goal is going to determine which exercises and how you need to structure those exercises are formatted in your workout. So the term for this is specificity, and that's the most important thing, especially if you are into strength, which I'm not going to be talking about as much on this minisode, but for example, if you're a power lifter and you have to compete with bench, squat, and deadlift, and you want to get those lifts stronger, it's probably a good idea to practice those lifts over time. It's probably a good idea to practice bench, squat, and deadlift, right? So that's what specificity means. But in this case, where we're trying to gain muscle mass, specificity can be it's still important. However, what we are being specific about with these exercises, dare I say, is not going to be the same as powerlifting. The first thing is, what is your goal? Is it strength or is it to gain muscle? And what I mean by specificity with hypertrophy, with muscle mass, it's still important to do those main lifts. It's still important to do bench, squat, deadlift, and then of course all of their variations, right? But you don't have to focus as much on becoming as proficient in the bench, squat, and deadlift, and you can rotate those out over time, which we will somewhat talk about here. Actually, I think one of the things that come up a lot with bodybuilding and with gaining muscle in general is variety and things like muscle confusion. So people think that you need tons of variety to keep the muscles guessing or to shock your system or whatever. But actually the answer might be the opposite of that. It's not going to be to the same extent as powerlifters, but it's still important that we perform basically the same lifts for a certain period of time. And I'll explain a little bit more. But first, we even have a study in this minisode, guys. I don't typically spout out scientific evidence or anything like that. I try not to get too nerdy and things, but this study was really interesting, and I think it does a good job at portraying the point that I am trying to get across. So real quick, this is from the muscle and strength pyramids. I'll put up a little picture here, but this is by Eric Helms, Andy Morgan, and Andrea Valdez, and I'll also put a link to that in the description if you want to buy this. But he mentioned back in 1998, a study was conducted where the participants performed the bench press, leg press, and bicep curls for 20 weeks. At the midpoint and the end point of the study, measurements of hypertrophy and strength were taken. Increases in muscle mass in the arms were significantly, Increases in muscle mass in the arms were higher at the midpoint, as were increases in strength. So basically, the arms, they got bigger and stronger. But interestingly enough, muscle growth in the trunk and the legs was not yet observed. So their legs and trunk didn't grow yet. However, at the 20-week mark, hypertrophy in the limbs and trunk finally became apparent. So the question becomes, why was there a delay in muscle growth in the trunk and legs and not in the arms? Because remember, at the midpoint, the arms got bigger and stronger, but the legs and the trunk did not. And so the researchers concluded that the movements with a low complexity, such as the bicep curl, are quickly learned, while the time needed to become proficient in compound movements is longer. Additionally, only once you become proficient with a movement are you able to effectively overload the movement to cause muscle growth. Therefore, the easy-to-learn bicep curl was mastered quickly and began to cause adequate overload to cause growth, while there was a delayed effect from the leg press and the bench press. Right? So that I think that's pretty cool. And to kind of dumb that down a little bit is that muscle confusion becomes BS because you don't spend enough time learning the lifts. And because, again, lifting is a skill. It's a practice. It's a movement. It's like shooting free throws or a golf swing or something like that. You repeatedly do the movement. And as you keep doing the movement, you're going to become better at it, which makes sense. And so if you take a bench press, which is a pretty complex compound movement, versus a bicep curl, people know how to do bicep curls or can at least learn how to do bicep curls more quickly than they can the bench press. And so you've got to think, if you can effectively do a bicep curl and do it well, that probably means you're going to end up growing more muscle than if you haven't learned the lift as well yet, especially whenever it comes to muscle growth. So you can't actually think about like pinpoint, like targeting your tension in your muscle groups good enough yet because you haven't learned the lift yet enough. So with muscle confusion, if you're constantly switching things up, you never actually become proficient at that movement to effectively cause growth. So I hope that kind of makes sense for you guys. And so the practical recommendation here to kind of sum that up and what these researchers have kind of concluded and what they talk about in the book is that 1 to 2 compound movements and 1 to 3 isolation movements for each muscle group, with the compound lifts primarily remaining static over time. So you want to pick 1 to 2 compound lifts for a muscle group, but then you also want to follow that up with 1 to 3 isolation movements for each muscle group. And whenever I say you want to keep them about the same over time, again, this is so that you can become proficient at that lift. You keep the bench press, you keep the flat, it could be even dumbbells, right? Flat dumbbell bench press the same over time so that you can actually become proficient at that lift. You can get stronger. You can actually target your chest more, assuming that's what you're trying to grow. It's like you just become overall more effective at growing that muscle whenever you keep that movement the same over time, or at least mostly the same over time. So that is super important to remember here. So for exercise selection, 1 to 2 compound movements and 1 to 3 isolation movements for each muscle group. So I think like, what would that look like? So on a week, like if you think of a bench press, for example, or chest, right? So the 1 to 2 compound movements, let's say that would be it could be flat barbell bench and then incline dumbbell bench, right? Those are going to be your 1 to 2 compound movements. And then as far as your isolation movements, this is where you can get a little bit more creative. And this is where you can add in a little bit more variety. So then that could be something like, it could be cable flies, it could be pec deck, even I guess a push-up would still be considered a compound movement. But you get the idea. So 1 to 3 isolation movements. So you could do incline dumbbell flies, and then you could do flat dumbbell flies, right? Those are going to be different variations of an isolation movement, a single joint movement, right? So that is what I want you to remember for that. And then so what exercise order should these be in? Like, should you do the flies first? Should you do the bench press first? Like what makes the most sense? And I think what makes the most sense, and for efficiency's sake, is to in most cases perform the compound barbell movements first in the workout and then follow it up with isolation movements. And you want to do the compound movements first because you're the freshest, right? And compound movements are going to hit multiple muscle groups, right? So you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck as far as uniform muscle growth, right? With those movements. And so you want to hit those whenever you are fresh in the beginning of the workout. You're feeling good. You're your strongest, right? And also from an injury risk standpoint, if you try and do squats or deadlifts at the end of a workout, whenever you're really tired and fatigued, well, you're only increasing your risk of injury because you're not going to be as coordinated, and you're not going to be as focused, you're not going to be as strong. Other limbs are already going to be fatigued, maybe ancillary limbs and just surrounding muscle groups, basically. They're going to be tired. So your injury risk goes up as well. So it makes the most sense, put those compound movements, in most cases, at the beginning of the workout. And so an exception for this would be, so you hear me saying, you need to do mostly compound lifts, right? Put them in the beginning. But what about whenever you want to, let's say you have a back and biceps workout, but you're really like your back is growing fine, but you actually want to grow your arms more. You want to do biceps more. Well, if you put the biceps at the end of the workout based off the logic that I just said, as far as exercise order goes, then you're not going to be able to put as much force and effort, and you're just going to be more tired by the time that biceps comes, and you're trying to grow those, right? You're trying to grow those more efficiently and effectively than your back. So it would only make sense, okay, in this case, you can kind of flip it a little bit. You can prioritize that weak point. You can put the dumbbell curls first in the workout, and then after that, then you can get into your back workout, because doing bicep curls isn't going to affect, at least not to a great extent, how many pull-ups you can do, doing any type of rows. It's not going to affect your back workout nearly as much. And so an exception of this would be like pre-exhaust, right? So people talk about doing pre-exhaust, which is just basically like doing, you're going to do cable flies before you do bench press. So you're doing the isolation movement before you do bench press. And so the only time that this doesn't, I'm not a fan of pre-exhaust because the term kind of makes it, the term pre-exhaust describes its limitations, is what I'm getting at here. Because you pre-exhaust your chest by doing flies, which you're not going to be able to lift as much weight, and therefore you're not going to be able to place as much tension on your chest to grow your chest as you could with a bench press. I know you cannot bench as much as you can pec deck, right? So that's why it doesn't make sense, because you pre-exhaust by doing the cable flies or doing the pec deck or something, but then whenever you get to the bench press, the movement that you're going to be able to build the most muscle, you're actually weaker because you're tired, right? So it doesn't make sense to do pre-exhaust because you get fatigued. It fatigues you so much that it then hinders your performance on the main lift, where we want to prioritize our performance, right? So that's why pre-exhaust is not the best idea. And actually with my clients, I use activation sets instead. And so I could say, hey, let's do a little bit of cable flies before your bench press, but I want you to stay far away from failure. So 4 to 5 reps away from failure. And what this means is that you're going to use a lightweight. You're just going to do some flies to get some blood flowing. Are these absolutely necessary? No, I don't think so. But in my experience, I've been able to feel the muscles a little bit better. And sometimes I do these with surrounding muscles as well. So I'll give an example of that in just a second. But with the flies, all I would do is do like 2 sets of 10 to 12 reps, super lightweight, nothing crazy. I'm just getting some blood flow in my chest. I'm just practicing the movement a little bit. I'm getting loose and warmed up, and also increasing my body temperature, which is helpful in warm-ups. And then after that, then I'll get into my heavy compound lift, right? So then I would do bench press sets of 6 to 8 or something. And then I would continue my workout from there. And then maybe I would do flies later on in the workout too. But in the beginning, just for activation sets, I'm just activating those muscle groups. So another example would be on legs, like before I would do squats or deadlifts or something, I would actually maybe do some hamstring curls, or I would do some abductions, so some machine abductions, get my glutes warmed up, get my hips warmed up, get my hamstrings warmed up, doing glute bridges or hip thrusts or something like that, just with body weight, getting those surrounding muscle groups warmed up can actually allow you to feel the muscles a little bit better whenever you're doing deadlifts or squats. It feels more fluid in my experience. And then of course, that's going to allow you to be stronger, safer, etc. So I think that is a good idea. Okay. And I think that should be just about it for Minisode number 50. I hope that helped you guys out. If you need to, go back through, re-listen to that, click on the link below if you want to look at more as far as the study that I was referencing to and the book that I was referencing to. That is how you sequence exercises properly. So thank you, as always, for listening and for watching. See ya.